This is the James Crepea Show.
Most of the time, just eat, play, sleep, and then just do it again.
Oregon Duck beat reporter for the Oregonian, James Crepea.
Yeah, hopefully you have some big wins early this season. That'll mean you've been a better commissioner.
He graduated from Ohio State and covered Auburn. We'll try not to hold it against him. KORE 1050 and 95.7, Fox Sports Eugene. Here is the James Crepea Show, presented by Dairy Mart.
Hit the lights and lock the doors, everybody. Welcome to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. I am James Crepea, the Oregon Ducks beat reporter for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. And we will start today with the Ducks and the latest by way of personnel updates from Mario Cristobal following today's practice. It was another practice in which Jake Hansen did not take part, so he has not practiced at all this week. We spoke with Mario after the practice. Hansen was among the injured players that he gave us an update on, and here's what Mario had to say regarding the various injuries for the Ducks.
Cyrus is still day-to-day, as is Jawan Johnson. We see progress in both, still day-to-day. Jake will be evaluated later today or early tomorrow, and Thomas Graham has been full go since really Tuesday.
So that being the big ones, again, Hansen day-to-day, being evaluated either later today or tomorrow. I followed up and asked if this was concussion protocol because it doesn't take exactly a genius to wonder why. Quite frankly, it's continuing evaluation, been out for several days, very ambiguous as to exactly what is going on here, and Mario just reiterated his original statement, which was being evaluated, updates to come, etc. So read into that what you will. That's where things stand with Hansen, but he has not practiced this week. That said, I would venture to guess that even though it is conference play, that if Hansen is cleared from whatever is currently ailing him, that having missed a few days of practice, while certainly undesirable, ultimately health is what matters first and foremost, and if he's cleared to play, this isn't a matter of knowledge of what's going on here. I understand missing practice matters, but ultimately, the young man has started over 40 games. So let's not get ourselves. If this was a true freshman making, what would be his first or second start or something, that's one thing. But in a situation like this, look, I think if he ends up being cleared, whether it be today or tomorrow, I would think there is at least a pretty good chance at that point, if he's cleared to play and feels well enough to play, then he plays. And if not, then Oregon still certainly feels very confident in Calvin Throckmorton at center and Brady Aiello at right tackle. And we also spoke to Mario about, well, then who else would back up those guys? Because, all right, this is clearly the first contingency, as we all knew at center, because Throckmorton played center in the first half against Utah last season when Hansen was suspended with the targeting penalty, and then obviously took over the second half against Montana last week. So even though he's not the backup center on a piece of paper, he is in reality. We all knew that, and especially with Aiello as the sixth guy, that was really clear. All right, well then what exactly is the plan at center in the event of something happening on Saturday if Hansen can't go? Well, Ryan Walk is still the second-team center. Alex Forsythe is the second-team left guard, who can work at center, though in preseason he was not doing a whole lot of snaps. Now he may do a few more pregame on Saturday and during this week because, in the event of disaster, you need that contingency. And Dawson Jaramillo also working there as well. I'd also asked Mario, is there any thought process about bringing an additional center with you because you have a travel squad? It's not a full 85. It's not a full home roster where, to be honest, I can't even remember exactly what the number is with the home rosters. I think in non-conference play, it may very well be the whole shebang because when they emptied the bench, there was virtually everybody in there, especially against Nevada. They played an unbelievable number of players. The travel roster size is 74 for the Pac-12, which 74 out of 85 scholarship players, that's pretty good. That's really, really sizable, obviously. Now you're talking 85 scholarship. Now, reminder, the Ducks are at 84 presently, not including, and we don't have the definitive number of, all right, for instance, Ryan Walker's a walk-on. Ryan Bay is a former walk-on who was on scholarship at one point last year, may or may not be going forward. Blake Maimone was a former walk-on who was on scholarship at one point. That one opening may create a possibility for one of them as well. But ultimately, those are guys who play, so you know that they're going to be part of it. So don't count them among the 84 current scholarship players on the roster. 10 of them will not travel. Will the guys who are definitively hurt and have absolutely no chance of playing whatsoever travel? I would say those would be the first ones to just not bother, because there's nothing to be gained from it. There's just no point. Why would you travel, whether that's J.R. Waters or Adrian Jack? There's not a point to it. For Schooler, he's a veteran guy. I can sooner see him, especially because he's getting closer and closer to returning to the field, potentially after the bye week for the Cal game, possibly, or even Micah Pittman in that situation, perhaps, because there you're putting both of them in a spot where I know that they both traveled for the neutral site game with Auburn, and that the travel squad is a little bit different there, for one. Two, I think you wanted to show a lot of those guys what the process is. I think for Pittman, you might want to do that, even though, again, he would count against the travel roster. Maybe. If he doesn't, it's not the end of the world, because, again, he's not playing. For the rest of it, though, we'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. I have a feeling that basically everybody who was at center was probably going to travel anyway, to be quite honest, with 74 players. But they were talking about that they're basically trying to determine who are those last 1, 2, 3 guys, because they're at around 76 and the travel squad has to be 74. So there are still some final determinations being hammered out over at the HDC for the Ducks. So the major personnel updates, like you say, Hansen still being evaluated. Juwan day-to-day, which I know fans most definitely just want to hear when he's on the field and you see him on the field. That's all you want to know at this point, because he's missed 3 games, and you've heard week after week that it's a day-to-day thing and a game-time decision, and I can certainly understand some frustration there, and I can tell you the young man is frustrated as well. But he has been practicing, but exactly to what extent and will he be able to take the field, we'll find out on Saturday. Graham, full go. I'll also later followed up with Mario regarding the guys who were out last week and were held out. So Bryson Young and Khalif Halasi, who were held out last week, precautionary. He said those guys were full go this week, whereas Austin Fallew, who was held out last week, has been limited this week. Now, all 3 of those guys were held out precautionary, but it's unspecified as to what their injuries are. Habibi Likio, who is day-to-day as well, that was back spasms on Saturday. He left at in the first half, didn't return after halftime. Just by how much he was not moving, and I know he was limited yesterday at practice. I don't know definitively about today, but according to Mario, he's day-to-day, so I'd assume he was probably limited as well. I would probably lean more towards the idea of a C.J. Verdell, Travis Dye, and Darian Felix running back core. And frankly, who travels and who doesn't at running back might be one of the more interesting ones by way of this travel squad, I think. Because let's put it this way. If Habibi Likio was absolutely healthy and traveling, do you really travel 5 running backs?
Nope.
I don't know. I mean, maybe not. I'd probably lean no. Certainly not 6. And Javon Wilson really hasn't played, so okay, it's clear that he's going to be redshirting. That's fine. But was Sean Dollars definitively traveling before? I don't know that for a fact. Maybe, probably. But now, I'd say it's almost a mortal lock that he is, just because of the injury to Habibi Likio that, again, we'll see to the severity and extent and whatnot there. So that's the updates by way of personnel. The most encouraging news, certainly, that Thomas Graham has been out there in full go, because that injury could have been, well, one, it really could have been quite bad if a diving receiver inadvertently slams into your foot, your ankle area. That could have been real bad. But he walked off on his own, though he didn't return to the game on Saturday. The fact that the x-rays were negative and everything, and that he's been back, we'll go at practice, That's certainly a positive. And also that you do have some depth there, albeit in freshmen, with Mykael Wright behind Thomas Graham Jr., and on the other side that you have a DJ James behind Diamador Lenore. That helps. That helps there more by way of comparison to the wide receiver core, where obviously we've been talking about for weeks how this receiver core is dealing with numerous injuries. And the depth that's there, much of it is really young or really inexperienced, or both. So having plenty of questions to answer by way of personnel, there are your updates for the Ducks by way of personnel updates from practice today. Today's guest, we'll have Erik Bacharach, covers the Tennessee Titans for the Tennessean. He'll be joining us at the bottom of the hour and giving us an update as the Titans prepare to take on the Jaguars Thursday night in Jacksonville. Obviously, Tennessee coming off a loss, a close game to the Colts. So get an update on him on Mariota and the contract year. And he was actually not practicing earlier this week, but now he's been practicing the last 2 days. And it's a Thursday night game, and Jalen Ramsey and the back and forth. And one, what happens if Jalen Ramsey doesn't play and the impact that could have positively for the Titans. And the second part is Jalen Ramsey has previously mentioned prior to the season, during the offseason, he talked about, well, if the contract doesn't come through, here are 2 places I'd like to go. And he's, I think, from the greater Nashville area or from Tennessee somewhere, I'm forgetting now. And so he mentioned Tennessee, and the other one being the soon-to-be Las Vegas Raiders, and that those would be the desirable locations. And you already have reports out of Oakland about some, anonymous players responding to the idea of what he would bring to that team. A team that has an extra first-round pick, a team that has a lot of salary cap room, a team that needs a number 1 corner, and a team that is going to play Pat Mahomes for the next indefinite number of years. Sounds like a team who could really use a top cornerback kind of thing. So we will ask Erik about it because he mentioned possibly going in that this is off-season talk, not in the last week. But if he's heard anything from Tennessee on that front, and at the 5:15, we will have Kurt Kragthorpe of the Salt Lake Tribune joining us again. Covers Utah, and Utah starting off quite nicely with non-conference play, with albeit a weak schedule, but still 3-0. And the Utes face, certainly it's the game of the week in the Pac-12, and most definitely so in the Pac-12 South, Utah and USC. The Utes traveling down to Los Angeles for Friday night game. That is going to be a big one. That could be the most critical and pivotal game in that division all season. That comes Friday night, so we'll chat with Kurt about the Utes so far and about heading into Friday night's game. That and more coming up. You're listening to the James Crepea Show on Fox Sports Eugene. That theme music always brings me back, and I know that NBC obviously is long out of the game and that it's now being used by Fox.
It's actually being used quite a bit across the board now.
I know.
It's just because it's round ball rock because it's John Tesh.
But that just brings me back, man. Frankly, it brings me back to a time that I cared about the NBA. Brings me back to a time that I could actually stand to watch some of the NBA. But with the Blazers, they are a fun team to watch, and they are a fun team to listen to. But so I will be following them a bit more now, most definitely. But you got to remember, for the last while, man, I was residing in a place where there were no pro sports.
Right.
And, the Hawks are up the road, and they were awful, and I really didn't care at all there. So you couldn't have paid me to watch some of it. It just wasn't going to happen. And if I did, it was in the playoffs against, with the better teams. It was mainly Western Conference teams.
Yep.
Outside of, the Cavs or the Heat, whatever, depending on where LeBron was in the given year. I was really mainly watching West Coast NBA basketball, in May and June. when it mattered.
The only time of the year that it really matters.
When I was, let's put it this way. You were not getting me, with everything else going on, you were not getting me to stay up, into the wee morning hours to watch, the Grizzlies play the Spurs on a random Tuesday in, December. That wasn't happening. So I was happy to indulge in the NBA in the later part of the spring for the playoffs. But yes, with the Blazers, now they're a fun little team, and they obviously had quite a bit of success. So looking forward to their season. But yes, the round ball rock brings me back to a time and era where it was a little bit more fun for me. I'm just speaking for me. It's fun for me to watch the NBA, but we'll see. going forward, like I say, this season, it'll be could be a little bit more interesting with the Blazers the way they're presently composed. Shifting gears to an issue that will just continue over and over and over and over again, I think, across the country to gain more and more traction. Obviously, California with the Fair Pay to Play Act that is currently sitting at Governor Gavin Newsom's desk, and he has approximately a month, a little bit less at this point, but approximately, for that to be addressed. But now you have other states coming through. And that first, you heard in South Carolina that there were a couple of state politicians talking about putting forth a bill pretty similar. And now in New York, they're talking about it as well. And it's actually been brought to the legislator there. Maryland, Colorado, state of Washington's talked about it. There's a congressman from North Carolina that's talking about it. So it's being discussed at various different places. And that's why I say this is going to come up repeatedly across the country. So we mentioned this one from New York, though, because this is a little bit different. It's structured a little bit differently in premise. So it's not just that the state of New York is merely copying the California bill to potentially allow for college athletes at universities in the state to be able to profit from their name, image, and likeness, which the NCAA, as we've discussed before, the NCAA has a working group to address this. They're going to come forth with a report and suggestions, and there's probably going to be changes to legislation at the NCAA level long before any of these state-level initiatives ever go into effect or ever become law. But the fact that there is increasing pressure at the state level in this country is frankly a good thing, because it will hold the NCAA accountable, force their hand to actually act in perhaps a little bit faster timetable than they might ordinarily. And frankly, these laws do need to eventually get on the books, because even if there are changes, as I say, you don't want to just take it for granted that that's the way it's going to be forever indefinitely. No, like, you go, okay, well, fine. Everything got addressed long before the law went into play. Fine, but the law can still come into play, whether it be in 2023 or for California's purposes, or another date and time for another state. Here is the difference, though, with the New York State. The state senator is proposing this bill that, like I say, it's like California. South Carolina's hasn't been formally put forth yet, but similar. The difference is that he's added an amendment that would require college athletic departments to give a 15% share of annual revenue to the athletes. Where this state senator in New York got 15% from, haven't a clue. Why he picked that number as opposed to any other number, no idea. Why isn't it higher? Couldn't tell you. Why does he mention it at all? Couldn't tell you. But this is where this bill is inherently different, and why I think it is inherently bound to fail because of that amendment. And we'll get into it here momentarily. But prior to this, no other state has proposed giving college athletes money directly from their schools, which, of course, as it presently stands, is not within the NCAA rule book, to say the least. So the New York State Legislature runs from January through June. So obviously there's quite a bit of time until this would even hit the floor. Things can change. But this state senator said that he has support of one other senator. And this is, again, a state senator, not like Chuck Schumer, senator, federal. State senator on the state level. So far, and he's searching for a co-sponsor in the state assembly, and that they hope to have a bill basically be a higher priority once the year begins and the legislative cycles begins in New York in January. Here are the issues in it that, one, here's a quote from him in the story. It's about equity. These young people are adding their skill, talent, and labor to these universities. You don't need the shortcuts and the end-arounds, because now we're providing some real support for these student athletes. Now, he even uses the term student athletes, which I refuse to do. But be that as it may. Again, my question, I have a million questions on this front. One, where did he come up with 15%, and why is it 15%? Two, how and why, and who designated him as the guy to come up with that number, above all. Third part, this is beyond a horrific idea. And let me explain why. Name, image, and likeness makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. Because, one, all the compensation is not coming from the school. Two, it is about their name, image, and likeness, as inherently the name spells out. Why can't that person be able to profit off of that? Because the NCAA and colleges and universities in this country want to designate the college athlete as an athlete that's different than a student when it suits them, and then they want to treat them like every other student when it suits them. Well, every other student can transfer without having to sit out or anything else. Well, that's different. That's not competition, whatever. Okay. But they can transfer without any penalty other than any finance or loss of course credit or that kind of nonsense. And the other part is, well, the person sitting next to the college athlete in the college class, they're able to profit off their name, image, and likeness with impunity. So if they have a big social media following or something, or they want to launch a business via that or any other means and use their name, image, and likeness to promote that business, they are free to do that. But the college athlete, oh, no, we can't do that. Why? So the name, image, likeness part makes perfect sense. The reason why I say the 15% share of revenue from the school's athletic department going to the athletes, in an equal share among all athletes at that school, by the way. Who came up with that? According to, apparently this state senator, Kevin Parker, in the state of New York. It is a multi-layered, horrific level of ideas. Because being from that state, I'll explain why a little bit as fast as I can. One, Syracuse is a private school, so while they are certainly the largest FBS-level football program in that state, they're a private school, not a public school. The public schools in the state of New York that have Division I football are Buffalo, which is at the FBS level in the MAC, and Stony Brook, which is at the FCS level. They would love to get to the FBS, but they can't draw worth a damn, and it's never going to happen, frankly. And if they do, they're going to hemorrhage money like crazy. Okay. Then everybody else. So Binghamton, Albany, Stony Brook also, St. John's, which is private. Everybody else, hither and yon, is basketball focused. The revenue is lower, but they're basketball focused. So what I want to know is, so when Albany makes the NCAA tournament, which it has made, it has happened. This is not a completely ridiculous hypothetical. No, it's happened recently. The America East gets a cut, and then the school who makes it gets a cut. So under this New York State legislator's proposal, when Albany makes the NCAA tournament, when the men's basketball team makes the NCAA tournament and receives its cut, he would like the share of revenue, 15% of the overall school's share of revenues to go to the athletes. So we want to tell those men's basketball players that, hey, congratulations for making the tournament. Yes, you'll receive a piece of this, but so will the athlete in pick the sport. I'm not going to get into it. The other sports in your department, they're also going to get cut. What? Why? Why would, huh? They're all in the same department. It's a shared mission. I mean, on one hand, yeah, sure. I'm sure they're all friends, and I'm sure they're all happy for each other's success. But that was the team that made it. Why would the success of the one team at that school and the revenue that may come from it then pay for and provide anything beyond the scholarship to teams who are not successful at all, who aren't generating revenue or anything near a profit? Why? That part of it gets beyond complicated. And that's just at the basketball level, where in many instances, like I say, a lot of these schools don't necessarily have that level of success. Obviously, Syracuse is the biggest. Again, they're private. They're a different situation. But frankly, Syracuse goes to a bowl game, gets its cut from the ACC. Men's or women's basketball makes the NCAA tournament, gets its cut from the NCAA. You want to tell the members of the Syracuse football, men's and women's basketball teams that they have to give on one hand, hey, they're getting more than they're getting now in theory. So that's great. But you're not getting the full 15% of the cut to that revenue specifically because members of every other team at the school are going to get a piece of the action. What? That it doesn't make logical. That will only breed resentment. That doesn't jive at all. That doesn't make any sense. So this amendment, while on one hand I kind of applaud him for thinking in this way, on the other hand, he has no idea what he's doing. Not a clue. And by the way, what the heck is 15%? Because if we want to get into the management, labor splits, and unions and all that kind of stuff, and by the way, that is never happening at the collegiate level, it's just not happening. But if you did, those revenue splits in professional sports are somewhere close to 50-50. It ranges. It's 47-53. It's 48-52. It's 49-51. And it's how they split the numbers is everything. But there's collective bargaining. There's unions. There's all kinds of other things. But it's very close to 50-50 split. So why did he come up with 15? And then, by the way, within that 15, that is going to be shared equitably across all athletes within that school. This is overstepping bounds at levels that this bill, in my profession, in just my personal opinion here, has no chance. None. Because the state level schools and universities will go bananas about this, let alone what Syracuse will do. But and then what do you do in the Ivy League, like a Columbia that's there? And don't ask. So, anywho, mentioning it because, one, was another bill, but two, this bill is different and has some levels of complications that I don't even think we're going to allow it to pass in New York, let alone ever gain traction elsewhere in the country. I think this is way, way out of bounds. But we'll chat about that a little bit more as coming up. But we'll also chat with Erik Bacharach, again, covers the Tennessee Titans for the Tennessean, and we will chat with him momentarily as the Titans prepare to take on the Jaguars Thursday night. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. And we now welcome on our first guest. He covers the Tennessee Titans for the Tennessean in Nashville, Mr. Erik Bacharach. You can follow him on Twitter at Erik Bacharach. That's ErikBacharach. Welcome to the show, Erik.
Thanks for having me on, James. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Another former Newsday guy. So I've had on you now, and I had Ronas on a week or so ago. So I'm just slowly making my way through all of our former employees from our sports department, little by little, progressively. What with the Titans now, Erik? It's a second year on the beat, so it's in certainly worse places to be. You've got a pretty fine franchise quarterback in Marcus Mariota, but he is in the last year of his current contract, making over $20 million this year. Let's start to the here and now. He was not practicing on Monday, dealing with a quad injury, but been back practicing the last 2 days. What is the latest health-wise for Marcus Mariota?
Yeah, I think he's fine. I think he'll be fine for the game on Thursday. He will be. The injury report today, he didn't have an injury designation, so he'll be good to go for Thursday against the Jaguars. And Monday, that was an estimated injury report just because it's a short week. They didn't actually practice on Monday. It was more of a, if we did have practice, he would have set out, and that probably would have been just a precautionary measure anyway. He's fine. He took a couple of big hits last week against the Colts. Honestly, a couple of them were self-inflicted, and he admitted as much after the game. There was one where he was upended by a Colts defender where he could have ran out of bounds, could have done a couple of different things to avoid taking such a big hit that he did. And afterward, he said it was probably a dumb decision to do that. And with a guy like Marcus, who is yet to make it through an entire 16-game season, through his first, now this is his fifth year in the league, he's got to be smart about those types of decisions. But he'll be good to go for Thursday. Because, as you mentioned, the injuries has always been the storyline with Marcus in the NFL, and obviously also the change in coordinators and playbooks and everything else. This really is, obviously, it's a contract year, and it's the last, and that inherently makes it important, and he's making over $20 million, but this is a franchise that put a lot of money into him and a lot of focus into him in the first place, and things out of his control with a change in coaches or coordinators, but the health part, insofar as he can control it, what is the thought process? I'm sure it's been all off-season talk, but now that the season's been underway, in this most recent game, he took a few more shots. What has been kind of the storyline and talk around Tennessee of, this quarterback's health is as they try to plan for the future, wherein right now he's coming off a game where he just took a couple more hits, and it may have been minor, but still, injuries are always a concern right now for him. Yeah, for sure. That's always a big thing with Mariota. It especially was last year. He dealt with nerve injuries starting with week one. He left that game with a nerve injury to his right throwing arm, and those continued to nag him all year. And we never really, I felt like we never really saw him fully healthy the entire season. In this offseason, he took some measures to sort of become more durable. He tacked on, probably 15 pounds just as a measure, as I just said, to become, sort of a quarterback that could withstand, the kind of grind of a 16-game season a little bit more with all the hits he takes. So that's always a big thing, when sort of looking at what the Titans are going to do with him, because they obviously have a huge decision coming up next offseason as far as, do they want to, keep him around? Don't they? Do they want to franchise tag him and sort of stave off that decision and kind of buy themselves more time there? And I think everything is still on the table. And as much as his injury history and just durability is a question, I think, after these first 2 weeks and last 2 years really is sort of just his capability of playing. And as you mentioned, he's kind of been unfortunate in that he's had sort of a revolving door of offense coordinators, of coaches, of play callers. Arthur Smith, Titans first-year offensive coordinator this year, is actually his fifth play caller in his fifth season. So, that familiarity is sort of, or lack of familiarity has sort of hindered his ability to sort of jump headfirst into his season, when he's got to spend the off season learning the ins and outs, the nuances of a new play caller. I will say with Arthur Smith, he's a guy that's been on staff since 2011, was the tight ends coach last year, and that familiarity was part of the reason that he was hired or promoted to the position, just because, if you look at what the Titans did this offseason, it really felt like it was all geared toward making sure that there's just no more excuses for Mariota in terms of the weapons around him, from bringing in Adam Humphries as a free agent to drafting former Ole Miss wide receiver A.J. Brown in the second round. And a big question last year was the interior of the offensive line. Mariota was sacked a career-high 42 times last year. And, that was a big part of the injury situation, was just that it felt like he was running for his life most of last year, just behind a really porous interior of the offensive line. So what do? They go out and they get Roger Saffold, who was really billed as sort of the top guard on the market, and he's looked pretty good. He's gotten beat a couple of times for a couple of sacks, so that's something to continue to watch. And honestly, the sack thing is something that's come up again this year. He's been sacked 8 times. Only 2 quarterbacks in the league have been sacked more than that. Part of it is the offensive line. The Titans are currently missing their 3-time Pro Bowl left tackle, Taylor Lewan, who was suspended for PEDs before the season started. Their right guard, Kevin Pomfield, has been hurt with a knee injury. So they've kind of been, going ahead with a couple of backups on their starting offensive line. And honestly, a lot of it falls back on Mariota, and it was very apparent this past week against the Colts, where he was just holding on to the ball too long in a couple of key instances that really ended up costing the Titans valuable yardage in key situations. So the Titans really have a lot to unpack as far as what they're going to do, in half a year or so from now, as far as what they do with Mariota. All we know, I think, to this point is that he hasn't exactly helped this case through the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and obviously that's going to be a talking point, and we'll revisit it with you later in the year because,
Sure.
Yeah, it's going to be huge, and certainly in the offseason, one, in general, because it's going to be a major decision for that franchise and with a quarterback that this market cares very much about, and 2, because I'll probably be at the Combine again and see you because I'll be covering a quarterback who could be considered for about half a dozen teams in the league right now as it stands, so we'll definitely revisit that. How have the Titans responded to that loss to Indy? Because, all right, look, nobody goes undefeated nowadays, so it's going to happen. But this was a close loss, and you mentioned there were some self-inflicted mistakes. There was very, very hard decisions throughout that game. It was a close game. Indy comes back in the fourth to take the lead. Tennessee had the ball twice in the final, I want to say it was about 5 or 6 minutes. They had no choice but to punt with like 3 and change to go because they were so deep in their own territory. They did get the ball back again, but ultimately couldn't put it together on what was, frankly, I thought it was a pretty bad pass at the end there. How have they been able to respond in this short week to that loss and look ahead to another division game here on Thursday night with Jacksonville?
Yeah, I mean, it's for them. It's about turning the page quick because if you can get this win against the Jaguars, you're in good shape. I think just going 2-1 against the schedule that they've had to start. It's just that loss against Indy was really a debilitating and disheartening one for so many reasons. Chief among them just being the fact that they retired Eddie George and Steve McNair's numbers that day. So the crowd was really excited for it. Eddie George came out to practice to speak with the Titans the week in the practice week leading up to that game. Told them to take this game against the Colts personal because with Luck retiring, Luck was 11-0 against the Titans. With him retiring, the Titans kind of riding the momentum of beating the Browns by 30 points in week one. Kind of looked like, just the way the AFC South is shaping up. Now, the Texans are pretty good and still right there in the mix, and the Colts are too, but it's really up there for the taking.
Oh, it's a wide open division.
For one team that wants to seize it. Yeah, exactly. So if you're the Titans, you're pretty healthy. You've got your quarterback in a contract year. Derrick Henry's playing well. The defense, I think, could very well be a top 5 unit in the league. Eddie George was, to me, he was right. This is a division that's there for the taking. It could be, as he said, sort of the changing of tides. And that really kind of made it all the more frustrating. And just how they lost, because it was a close game that, as you mentioned right there at the end, if Mariota's throw is a little bit more on point, they have a first down and they have a chance for a long field goal to win that game. It was also probably a catchable ball for A.J. Brown, but it does, to me, I think it's got to be a better throw, period. But there was just so many chances that they kind of let up. I mean, they were +2 in turnovers and still managed to lose that game. The tackling wasn't great. Jacoby Brissett turns out a pretty elusive guy for his 6'4", 230-something pound frame. And the Titans just did a really poor job of wrapping him up. But the conversation afterward really was sort of about Mariota and whether it was him not getting rid of the ball fast enough, some of the decisions that he made. In that final drive, he decided to spike it on third down with probably about 15 seconds left. And he went to the podium afterward and said, in hindsight, I should have done something different there. But, in crunch time, he's just trying to save them some time. But it ended up costing them a costly down to work with there at the end. So it really just felt like an opportunity, a huge opportunity missed, an opportunity squandered. And, I think if they could beat the Jaguars tomorrow night, they're still in good shape. And, the conversation about Mariota will continue regardless, obviously, in such an important year for him. And he still has plenty to prove. But if you're the Titans, it's easy to get hung up on a loss that was so sort of crippling, just with, again, everything at stake in that game, but they're still in good shape if they can pull off a win tomorrow night in Jacksonville.
Chatting with Erik Bacharach of the Tennessean, covers the Tennessee Titans. They play the Jaguars tomorrow night on Thursday Night Football. Erik, what were the Titans saying? Because on the other side of this, it has been distraction central down in Jacksonville with everything going on with Ramsey this week, and him coming out. That press conference yesterday was borderline comical.
It was something.
It was performance art. What have the Titans said at any level about what is going on there, and if he doesn't play, which a lot of people feel it would be crazy for the Jaguars to play him, whether they trade him before the game or after the game, having him active would be borderline nuts. So if he doesn't play, what have anybody with the Titans said about what is going on down there and the possibility of one of the better corners in this league not playing on Thursday night?
Yeah, I mean, they're preparing as if he's going to play. I mean, to me, it would be an insane sort of storyline for a guy that, might get traded on Friday and knows it and wants to be out out there on Thursday. I'll tell you who's kind of just excited about all of this is Taylor Lewan and former Titans linebacker Will Compton. They have a podcast called Busting with the Boys. They had Jalen Ramsey on this summer. And Ramsey, they kind of pressed him about, if you weren't in Jacksonville, where would you want to be? Ramsey said here, meaning Nashville or Vegas. And Ramsey is a national native, went to Brentwood Academy, so he's got ties to the area. He gave a shout out to that podcast during that insane sort of press conference the other day, which got a bunch of Titans fans pumped up here. But it's just really an intriguing sort of storyline if he's out there. Obviously, with just having an elite corner out there, it changes the complexion of their defense. But I just can't wrap my mind around what it would be like for a guy in his situation to be playing for a team that he may or may not be with 24 hours later. It's really kind of an absurd situation, and the Titans are preparing like he'll be out there, but we will find out in about 24 hours.
And lastly, we'll get you out of here on this, Erik. You mentioned that, and it's funny because, one, I know you cover them, and on the other hand, I know the reporter who was asking that line of questioning to Jalen Ramsey in Jacksonville about mentioning the podcast and mentioning what he said, and Ramsey's going, "Oh, you listen to that?" And I know it's Mark Long of the Associated Press asking him the questions. So I'm just like, Mark's just sitting there, yeah, I totally listened. Yeah, you were talking about this and that. And,
that was a funny interaction.
Yeah, so what have you heard on the Titans side of things beyond the podcast, obviously, but what have you heard in the last 24, 48 hours about, because those are two potential suitors. You've already got reports out there from Oakland, from the Raiders side, and mentioning about players already pontificating about what it would mean to them if they got that level of cornerback. Has there been anybody, even anonymously from Tennessee, talking about the potential to add him literally to that organization? He can come back on the plane if they get this done.
Yeah, he could. I mean, that would be pretty convenient. Save a plane ticket there. I haven't personally heard anything in regards to that, and to be honest, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest, just because, number one, the Titans have sort of parted with a good deal of draft capital of late, just to sort of shore up the offense the way they did this offseason. They've kind of made moves there, and to give up a first-round pick, which the Jaguars are asking for at the very minimum, a first-round pick plus, I think would be surprising, even though Ramsey is very much worth that price tag. And the second thing, and to me is the big thing, is just that personality. That there's nobody like that in the Titans locker room, and that's by design. If you talk with Mike Vrabel, he's just a guy that is very cognizant of the types of personalities that he brings into that locker room. If you look, from the offense to the defense, they're guys that, number one, really love football, and that was something that, was harped on, especially in light of the Andrew Luck news, just guys that want to be there, that want to go through that grind, and guys that aren't distractions off the field, which, as the media, every now and then a distraction is not something that we're all that opposed to. But, for the Titans, it's something that they just want no part of. And it's part of the reason why, when, the Antonio Brown thing played out, this offseason, even before the last couple of weeks, it seemed like it would never be a fit here. Of course, there's, you reach out to see what the price tag is and all that. But just personality-wise, that they're so picky about who they bring into that locker room, and Jalen Ramsey just does not seem like he would be a fit there.
Appreciate you, Erik. Thanks so much. And again, look forward to having you on later in the season, as Tennessee has a lot to think about with Marcus Mariota and his future in the NFL. Thanks so much.
You got it. Thanks, James.
You're listening to the James Crepea Show on Fox Sports Eugene. wanted to pass along a bit of a, I don't know if you want to call it news, note, what have you, but colleague Nick Daschel, who covers Oregon State for the Oregonian and Oregon Live, he had written up a story today for us that you can check out, but in case you missed it, so Oregon State sent an email out on Monday to season ticket holders for football and offered individual tickets to Oregon State's Final Four home games at no additional cost. So if you have season tickets to Oregon State Beavers football and you would like to get additional tickets to a single game, so for instance, if you have 2 tickets or 4 tickets, season tickets that is, and you would like, if you have 2, if you have 4, free tickets to one of OSU's remaining home games, which the very next one is only a week from Saturday against Stanford, you can put in a claim and do that.
And if you've got a friend who's got season tickets and you want to go,
correct,
you should hit them up.
Right. So you've got the choice of Stanford on the 28th, Utah on October 12th, Washington on November the 8th, or Arizona State on November the 16th. Those are the 4 remaining home games for Oregon State, where if you are a current season ticket holder and for however many tickets you have, that's how many free tickets Oregon State Athletics is willing to give you to one of those 4 games the rest of the way. So, and I did a quick look just as a, hey, well, what are they going for out there, just by way of, all right, what's the value of this beyond the fact that you would be getting it for free as a season ticket holder, but what are they going for out there? Just as a means of comparison. So this is just the get-in price. This is not talking about
the aftermarket price.
The get-in price on the aftermarket.
Okay.
So Stanford at Oregon State on the 28th, the get-in is $14. Utah on October 12th is $16. Washington, $31. Arizona State, $12. So rounded around $17 to $20. That's get-in price. That's the cheapest seats. Now, to be clear, these free tickets that Oregon State is providing are not nosebleed and aren't end zone and aren't awful. In some cases, more often than not, they're as close to where your present seats currently are as you can get. Maybe they're not literally right next to, but probably in the same section.
That's pretty cool.
So flat out, like, it's not like they're just saying, we're giving you 4 seats, but they're going to be off in the nosebleeds. No, they'll be pretty nearby. So again, in case you missed it, if you are an Oregon State football season ticket holder, the department is giving you the equal number of free tickets to one of the 4 remaining home games for the rest of the season. So put in your claim now for that. More coming up. You're listening to the James Crepea Show.
This is the James Crepea Show.
Most of the time, just eat, play, sleep, and then just do it again.
Oregon Duck beat reporter for the Oregonian, James Crepea.
Yeah, hopefully we have some big wins early this season. That'll mean you've been a better commissioner.
He graduated from Ohio State and covered Auburn. We'll try not to hold it against him. KORE 1050 and 95.7, Fox Sports Eugene. Here is the James Crepea Show, presented by Dairy Mart.
As we open the 5 o'clock hour, we'll spend some time breaking down Oregon and Stanford ahead of Saturday's game. And that will be starting with the Oregon offense against the Stanford defense. I wrote a story earlier today on OregonLive.com, and you can check out, as I do, with most of the better opponents. I think I might have done it the past couple of weeks with Nevada and Montana as well. But with the better opponents in particular, I'll mention if they have a particular star player or two, what the thoughts are about either matchups or what a quarterback might bring to the table or receiver or whatever the case may be. So with Stanford, if you're talking about their defense, the conversation must start and end with Paulson Adebo. And that there's no way around that. That is not just their best defensive player. That is one of the best cornerbacks in the Pac-12. He is that good. Now, as is the case in the world we live in today, I put that story out this morning and tweeted out, And the headline for it was, let me just read it back so I don't in any way misrepresent anything. I want to be perfectly accurate here for folks. But I believe it was, yes, it's can Oregon Ducks receivers get open against Stanford lockdown cornerback Paulson Adebo? And if you look at any of his statistics, he is a lockdown cornerback. It is what it is. Look at any NFL draft boards. He's pretty high up out there nationally. He will be playing on Sundays. But because of the world we live in today, before anybody bothers to get around to reading the story and sees that I mentioned that, yes, he got lit up like a Christmas tree this past week against UCF on a couple of plays, one of them on a 30-plus yard touchdown, which they made a double move, UCF. The receiver made a great move. And they called it out on the telecast ahead of time saying, yep, they felt that they could work him pretty good and use his aggressiveness against him and et cetera. And here it is. And lo and behold, a big play for UCF. Now, it's not a play that loses Stanford the game because it was a runaway, but be that as it may. In the story, I mentioned this play and include the video of this play. So good as he is, he's not infallible. All I was saying is he is really good, and this receiver core, even if it gets Juwan Johnson back, frankly, is going to face a big challenge. That's all. It's not saying he's unbeatable. It's just he's really good. Like, really good. Not just he happens to be their best defensive player. He's one of the best corners in the country. Pro Football Focus had him ranked as the number 20 returning player in the country. So he's pretty good.
I don't know. It doesn't sound very good to me.
So I put out, can they get open against him? And automatically, instantly, because fans are fans, and that's great. The first thing is, well, if you watched anything with UCF, yes. And then they're showing about like the team pass efficiency defense for Stanford, which is not good, or the yards allowed and everything else aren't good. It's like, well, yes, that's the defense as a whole, or the secondary as a whole. But that's not indicative entirely of how he's playing.
Just basically you're saying just don't pass to his side and you're fine.
Well, for one, yes, by the way that the statistics are indicating right now, Stanford has some very un-Stanford-like statistics. And not just on defense, but we're talking about the defense right now. But yes, on defense, they have some very un-Stanford-like statistics right now, including in the passing game. And yes, UCF lit them up. And they're not alone. They have not played well in the secondary. They haven't. And Adebo, yes, he got beat a couple of times this past weekend by a high-octane, powerful offense in UCF. And I know, they have a different quarterback and this and that. That's a talented team. Believe me. No matter what team you pull for in the Pac-12, you would not sign up to play UCF right now. I'm not telling you that you'd be afraid of them. I'm just saying that that's a formidable opponent against anybody in the Pac-12 right now. It happened to be Stanford, but hey, no matter who would have been playing them, Pac-12-wise, would have a challenge on their hands. Don't tell me about freshman quarterback or anything else. That's a talented team. That is. Okay? They're right in there in the rankings with Oregon for a good reason. It's a talented team. That aside, don't throw to his side because it's a lot easier. However, I personally am of the opinion and approach that maybe a little bit more at the college level. You have seen it happen at times in the NFL level on occasion, on extreme occasions with corners where, that level of lockdown corner really does take away half the field, and there's just no way around it. Whether it's Patrick Peterson years ago or Revis, or those guys do exist. Jalen Ramsey we're talking about. However, I'm not entirely sold. And again, you see it a little bit more with college because the talent disparity is a lot wider. But I've always been in the opinion that as long as your quarterback is good enough, and obviously Oregon's is, I got to trust my guy, man. I've got to trust my guy, and I've got to be willing to test those better players in the right matchup and occasion. I'm not saying go at them relentlessly, but you have to be willing to test. And Oregon was last season. Oregon tested Adebo multiple times last season with Dylan Mitchell. And I know, look, Dylan Mitchell had a terrific season for Oregon last year. Terrific. He was obviously their best receiver. However, as far as next-level players go, Mitchell's a practice squad guy with the Vikings and was a 7th-round pick. Paulson Adebo is probably going to be a first-rounder for somebody. And he had success in the game. They went to him a lot. But there were times that Adebo forced incompletions, and there were times that Dylan Mitchell caught balls. It happens. That's the competition. So that's why I say I think you're willing to test, clearly, but also remember that in overtime, after Justin Herbert had put forth one of the most accurate performances during regulation by any FBS quarterback in the last 5 years, that in overtime, when they did have to turn to Mitchell and only turn to Mitchell in a short field, that it was Paulson Adebo on him the whole time and forcing incompletions. So all I'm saying is respect the guy. I know that they've been lit up. I know that Stanford's not playing well. And I know you can feel that Oregon's going to win, cover, and blow the doors off of them, all of which may be true. But defensively, don't take my word for it. Mario Cristobal, who isn't exactly somebody who bills the opposing player as this unbelievable deal unless it has some weight, said to Canzano early this week that he might be the number one corner in America. Okay, he's not throwing that praise around as empty talk. It's not how Mario rolls. Paulson Adebo is a legitimate defender. More than legitimate. So whoever lines up against him, whether it's Juwan Johnson in his debut, if he does take the field, whether it's Johnny Johnson, Jalen Redd, though I would be pretty surprised if that happens because he lines up more in the slot, Brian Addison, Josh Delgado, whoever, that person is going to have a tall order on their hands. Probably the most difficult corner matchup they're going to face this season, quite honestly.
Even more than Cal's secondary?
On an individual matchup basis? Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Now, unit-wise, yes, the Cal secondary, yes. Yes. I put the Cal secondary, by the way, ahead of Auburn secondary. I do. Now, look, by the end of the year, that may change. But right now, yes. But on a strictly individual, if you're on an island, one-on-one, the safety's not there to do all that, because, again, we can get into the fact that the Stanford secondary, besides Adebo, isn't as good. But I'm talking about just individual matchup. Yeah, it's probably the most difficult.
Okay.
Probably. But, yeah, doesn't mean don't throw at him. Just respect the heck out of this guy, is all I'm saying. And I don't think the players have that issue, but the fan reaction to the story this morning was why I'm saying it. Because it was just like, oh, come on. They totally got lit up by UCF. It's like, all right, folks, just can you read the story for a second? Because I do mention in there that, yes, he did give up a touchdown, too, so he wasn't infallible. And as David Shaw said in his press conference, yeah, look, sometimes it's like with linemen. If you're an offensive lineman, they don't ever mention your name. You did your job right. If you're a corner, you don't ever get your name mentioned. You don't have any tackles or pass deflections. You did your job right. But you give up a touchdown, and everybody knows it. So there were a couple of plays that Paulson Adebo got beat on against UCF, and those stick out. But according to David Shaw, he's like 2 plays out of 60. You know, what do you want to flog the guy over it? I mean, he played unbelievable. Still plays really well. But when he missed, yeah, he missed, and it was in glorious fashion, and it meant big things for UCF last weekend. If you're a Ducks fan, I'm sure you're hoping the same kind of thing. But that's why I say it starts and ends for Stanford's defense with him, without question. The rest of that secondary, no, it is not good. Not good at all. They have had, between whether it's injuries or other things, bottom line, the rest of their secondary is not as talented. It isn't. And as we mentioned, Steve, their stats are not Stanford-like.
That's true.
Their stats are very, very pedestrian right now. Now, let's be clear. Stanford's non-conference schedule, and they've already played a conference game where both quarterbacks were out, and that was when Keaton Slovis debuted for USC, and he torched Stanford in that game. And Costello was out for that game, and Stanford's offense had a harder go against USC. But they also opened the season with a win, don't forget, against a Northwestern team who might prove to be pretty solid. We'll see how Big Ten play goes, exactly how much that matters or doesn't or what have you. But they're pretty good, entering the year at least. So don't totally dismiss Stanford entirely either just because some of their stats aren't as good. Now, they aren't. Oh, they aren't. There are some crooked numbers on the stat sheet right now, albeit against, yes, a Power 5 opponent in Northwestern, a Pac-12 opponent in USC, and let's face it, the very best group of 5 program that would absolutely be better than no fewer than 20, if not 30, Power 5 programs in UCF. But there are some really crooked numbers on the stat sheet for Stanford on both sides of the ball. We'll get to the offense later, but for defense, they are allowing 32.3 points per game. That's 11th in the league and 103rd nationally. Yards, 415.7, 8th in the Pac-12, 94th nationally. Pass defense, 280.3, 11th in the Pac-12, 109 nationally. With a All-American caliber corner.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Those are some really, really crooked numbers there. That is hard to imagine.
And with the hits they've taken on the lines for injuries and just attrition,
their opponents are averaging right now 48.6% on third down. That's 11th in the Pac-12 and 119th nationally.
Eesh.
These are numbers that, as sacks, they don't have very many. Again, better competition. They didn't get an FCS game to, pound somebody into oblivion. Their pass efficiency defense is 11th in the league and 119th nationally. Sacks, 106. Tackles for loss, 101. This is not a Stanford defense like people are used to seeing for sure. And frankly, not a Stanford offense either. We will get to them too. So if you want to point out all the warts of Stanford, you've got plenty of areas to pick at. Plenty. All I'm saying is respect the heck out of Paulson Adebo. Now, at linebacker, they're dealing with some injuries. One of their starters, they're going to see if he's able to go again or not. And one of their backups is supposed to be out for a second straight week. So there will be further injury depletion, as we mentioned. But bottom line, Stanford defense has some really, really rough statistics heading into Saturday's game. And don't let Oregon's really good offensive statistics in some areas fool you entirely, because still remember, they only played Nevada and Montana the last 2 weeks. And while on one hand, you'd be really critical if they didn't put up those kind of numbers, because last year's non-conference play, they didn't have galling numbers in particular. So it was good to see the positive results. But don't walk in to Stanford and Palo Alto and think, because Oregon's offensive numbers are this and Stanford's defensive numbers are this, therefore it's got to be just this mauling. It may prove to be one, but don't walk in thinking like you've already won the game that way. And I assure you the players aren't thinking that. Because don't forget, Stanford's also won the last few meetings. And I'm not just talking about last year, I'm talking the last 3 meetings. This is still a formidable team. And when David Shaw's on the sideline, a still well-coached team. So respect that team first and foremost. We will shift gears and chat with Kurt Kragthorpe, covers Utah for the Salt Lake Tribune. Momentarily, you're listening to the James Crepea Show on Fox Sports Eugene. We now welcome back to the program Utah Utes beat reporter Kurt Kragthorpe from the Salt Lake Tribune. You can follow him on Twitter at TribKurt, K-U-R-T. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Nice to be here.
Well, let's go with a big picture perspective first. Utah starts off 3-0. Obviously, the non-conference caliber of competition outside of the opener with the Holy War. The other 2 games were not real barn burners by any stretch, but it was expected to get to 3-0. They are 3-0. What has been your impression of the Utes so far through 3 games, offensively and defensively?
Yeah, as you say, it's pretty much gone as expected. The defense has been pretty solid. They, in terms of pass coverage, had a couple of shaky first halves, both against BYU and Northern Illinois, but they're really tightened down after that and played solidly, and they've been as good against the run as ever. The offense has kind of typically been slow to get going, but Andy Ludwig's philosophy as the offensive coordinator is that the running game has a softening effect as the game goes along, and that's proven to be true, especially against BYU when they kept the ball for the last 9 minutes of that game, even without scoring, which is kind of an amazing feat. So, yeah, I think basically the Utes are on track, and I've been saying ever since this Pac-12 schedule came out last December for 2019 that the first two conference games at USC and at home against Washington State would be really interesting, and they're certainly shaping up that way.
Yeah, I would say so. These are most definitely going to be pivotal games, but this first one with SC certainly at the top of the list because of just the divisional impact for both of them. And I think for SC's purposes, certainly takes on a whole other level of meaning if since they're coming off that loss to BYU, could really change the narrative down in LA in a hurry, depending on how things go on Friday night. Let's stick with the offense, Kurt. Brian Thompson is a guy who went from really contributing very, very little to now very quickly leading the Utes receiving corps. What has this young man brought to the table, and what has allowed him to be so productive already?
Yeah, he's just been very effective as a deep threat, and he is a guy that we kind of are targeted around here as someone who could emerge. He was injured most of last season, got back in November, and played in 4 games, which was just the right amount to deserve his redshirt year. And he may have only caught 1 pass in those 4 games, but coming out of the spring, he was definitely a guy we figured would be a potential rising star on the offense, and that's proven to be true, particularly as a deep threat. He's a big target, and he runs really fast, one of the fastest guys on the team. And so Utah, their hallmark so far has been spreading the ball around, but Thompson does look like a guy who can really emerge as one of their top targets going forward.
On the ground game, it obviously starts and ends with Zach Moss, and at full strength, he is a real hoss to bring down, and he is already leading the Pac-12 in rushing again, some of it the caliber of competition, but don't want to take anything away. He is leading the conference in rushing. I would say it's not totally unexpected, but it's credit where it's due. The young man is putting forth performances on a week-in and week-out basis that are worthy of attention, and if he does it in conference play, worthy of accolades.
Yeah, and you frame it well, because I'm eager to see how it does play out in the conference, because Zach has gotten a phenomenal percentage of his yards after contact. That was even true against Idaho State, where he had like a 39-yard run where he was actually hit in the backfield. So he probably got credit for 41 yards after contact on that play. So it makes me a little nervous still about Utah's offensive line. I remember talking to you guys in August about how that was the biggest concern, and that's still proven to be true. But Tyler Huntley and his ability to avoid being sacked, and Zach Moss and his ability to get yards after contact, make it look like the offensive line is doing a great job, which, again, I'm not totally convinced is the case. But Moss really has been impressive. I remember we kind of had this song and dance in August, the fact that he had a cast on his hand, but we weren't allowed to report that in the media guidelines. And so there was a lot of questions about him, whether he even play in the opener against BYU, and he ran for 187 yards. And the further thing that's happened is they've only needed him to carry the ball a total of 28 times in the last 2 games against Northern Illinois and Idaho State. So he's both sharp and fresh going into USC.
Let's switch to the defense, Kirk, and we're chatting with Kurt Kragthorpe of the Salt Lake Tribune here on the Davis Roofing Hotline. Defensively, that linebacker core was going to go through, not an overhaul exactly, but they did have to reload, and boy, have they. Devin Lloyd and Francis Bernard already putting up big numbers. Lloyd was a guy who really didn't contribute much at all, and Bernard was a guy who transferred from BYU, had some big numbers at BYU a few years ago, had to sit out a year of transfer, didn't put up huge numbers last year. These are 2 guys who have already well surpassed their production from last season, only 3 games in. Is it just merely that that's the way that the Utes play and they're the guys there now, or what are they bringing to the table that maybe is a little bit different from that linebacker duo that so many of us were used to seeing the prior couple of years?
Yeah, again, I remember us talking about that in August, and me having major questions about the fact that Cody Barton and Chase Hansen were just so incredibly productive last year, and wondering if it was just a product of the system that whoever Utah sends out there will make a lot of tackles. And 2 things have happened. One is that Bernard and Lloyd really have played well and established themselves. And the other is that the defensive line is so formidable and takes up blockers that those guys are able to roam around and make a lot of plays. But again, you have to get there and you have to make the tackle. It's a two-pronged assignment, and they're doing a great job of both. And Lloyd, as you mentioned, has been really remarkable. 2 months ago, before camp started, we weren't talking much about him because a Penn State transfer named Manny Bowen was supposed to play that position, and then he ended up giving up football about 2 days before camp started, and Lloyd was thrust into that role. But now you wonder if he would have gotten onto the field anyway, because he is so remarkably productive. So again, Utah's scheme just uses those two linebackers 90% of the time with a nickelback in the scheme, and so if they can keep those two guys healthy, they're obviously being very productive so far, and they haven't missed Hansen and Barton nearly as much as any of us thought.
Let's shift to Friday night's game, Kurt. This is certainly a big one. Again, might be the most critical as far as the South Division is concerned, and yet it's the opener for Utah's purposes. This is certainly really important because for most people, these are the top two teams in the division, and there may not be much of a line. Now, look, we'll see. Time could prove otherwise. If Arizona State's for real, then that game, a month from now, takes on a different level of meaning as well. But this certainly has a lot on the line here. What is the level of importance to Utah? Because it matters. We can frame it that way as reporters, but win or lose, the season must go on. And if Utah was to lose, they can't come forward saying like, well, the season's over after the first game of the Pac-12 season. So how have the coaches, the players, how have they been talking about framing this game in their mindset?
Yeah, I think they have a pretty good balance. They've had this game circled for a long time, especially once they got past the BYU game. It's kind of like the whole season was divided into these segments. Of one was the opener with BYU, which is a unique thing that they've never had in the rivalry. And then there's kind of this two-game package of Northern Illinois and Idaho State. Even though Northern Illinois is not a bad team,
they're really not. They're really not.
They did get lumped together unfairly with Idaho State, but in fans' mind, they were ready to turn the calendar to USC right from the BYU game, and the team did a pretty good job of paying attention to those two opponents and taking care of them. But there's no doubt they're ready to move on to Pac-12 play, and they do know how important this game is. Now, it is true that last year they lost to Arizona State and still ended up winning the Pac-12 South title thanks to the Ducks helping out against the Sun Devils in Eugene. So the season wouldn't be over by any stretch, but man, and anytime you have the tiebreaker, that's a big advantage. And if USC is 2-0 and Utah is 0-1, and USC has a tiebreaker, that seems kind of daunting. Plus the fact, like I said earlier, that Utah's got to turn around and play Washington State next week, and the Cougars have really kind of had their number in the last four meetings, and so it's a pretty critical game and a critical 2-week sequence. Since I don't have to play one game at a time, I'm kind of packaging these two games, and I've said all along, if Utah is 5-0, then it's okay to start talking about the college football playoff. But the whole dynamic changes dramatically if they're 0-2 in conference play, and so I keep saying we'll find out a lot about this team by the end of September, and even by the end of Friday night, we'll know a lot more than we do now.
Oh, and as far as the competition with SC goes, no, you're absolutely right. Look, if Utah loses, SC gains a major leg up with the tiebreaker and everything else, because even if Utah turns around and beats Washington State, the tiebreaker's gone to SC at that point, and they've already had one of the game already. Whereas conversely, Utah wins, it can look to build some momentum and confidence to Wazoo for one, but two, anything to ratchet up further noise and distraction at USC, which will have lost back-to-back at that point. Then they're 1-1, and then now everybody's focus in October is about Helton and job security, where it's naturally going to go there. But if SC goes on a tear, well, then that's just not noise that's into the part of the conversation. But if SC starts tanking, that's going to be the very first thing that everybody jumps to. That's just naturally there. So, no, if Utah can win, one, it's important to Utah, but two, it could really put a wrench in USC's season pretty early on, even more than a quarterback injury clearly did.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So, I think you can make the argument that just in that sense, the game's probably more important to USC, but in terms of the damage that losing would do, in other words, it would hurt USC to lose more than would help Utah to win, if that makes sense. But certainly both factors are in play.
Obviously, there's been a lot talked about of Utah on the road, in particular in Pac-12 play, and that is a very daunting environment to play in for road teams to play at Salt Lake City. But for Utah on the road, and I know this is not exactly a series that has this unbelievably long history, but fact of the matter is they have only won in Los Angeles once, and you and I were not around, Kirk. That was in the 19-teens. So this would be pretty impactful. Has that been talked about at all for the players who have been around, so have made the trip before? Has the idea of ending, because I understand, again, they're new to the league, relatively speaking, new to the league, so it's not like the series has, 50 meetings in L.A. over the years. But nevertheless, Utah's lost in L.A. over and over again since they've joined the league. Last time was 1916. Has there been some discussion about wanting to be that first team to win in Los Angeles since the Utes joined the league?
Yeah, I think you can look at it both in terms of the 103 years and in terms of the last 8 years. I obviously it's kind of been mythologized a little bit because from 2003 to 2011, 1916 to 2011, they only played in LA 4 other times or something like that. So there's a huge gap from 1948 to when they joined the conference.
Yeah, from 48 to 93, there was one meeting and one other one in 01, but realistically
Yeah. But having said all that, the 4 games they have played in the Coliseum in the Pac-12 era have all been these crazy things, like USC blocking a field goal on the last play of the game that could have tied it and forced overtime. And that was Utah's very first Pac-12 game, in fact, in 2011. And then 2 years ago, the Utes led 21-7 at halftime, gave up 3 touchdown drives of 88 yards or longer to Sam Darnold and the Trojans in the second half. And yet, the Utes came back in the last minute and scored a touchdown and went for 2 to try to win the game. And had Darren Carrington, the former Duck, wide open in the back of the end zone, but the quarterback never saw him and just tried to run and got to the 1 yard line and got stopped on the 2-point play. So like I say, even throwing out the whole century thing, just these near misses they've had in the Coliseum, and in 2015 the Utes were ranked number 3 and also had an early lead in that game, and then kind of fell apart. And so there's almost been enough recent experiences to overshadow the century-long history. So a lot of guys in the program obviously were at least on that 2017 team and some on the 2015 team. And so they know that the Utes need to break through at the Coliseum eventually.
We'll get you out of here on this, Kurt, and thanks again for joining us. It was you were pretty spot on late in August, heading into that season opener with BYU on how you thought it would play out, and it was going to be defensive and low scoring, and you picked the under, which hit well. How do you see this one playing out on Friday night?
Yeah, well, I'll add to that because of Utah scoring some defensive touchdowns, it almost went over, and if Utah hadn't taken a knee at the 3-yard line, they could have scored a touchdown that put it over. So that was a reminder, kids, don't ever bet on sports because these vagaries always happen one way or another. But my basic default position is that I'll believe that the Utes can win in the Coliseum only after they actually have done it. So I'm pretty skeptical. I do believe they're the better team, but what they haven't had to do is win a game in the fourth quarter this season, and odds are it'll come down to that again. So the players keep saying this is a different Utah team than the other ones they've gone down to Los Angeles with, and this is their chance to prove it. But like I say, I'll believe it when it actually happens.
Well, we'll certainly all be watching it on Friday night and look forward to chatting with you again, Kurt, like I say, throughout the season, because most people fully expect Utah to win and run away with the South Division, so I have a feeling we'll be chatting and catching up with some of these more pivotal games coming up. Thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, I'll look forward to doing that. Thank you.
You're listening to the James Crepea Show on Fox Sports Eugene. And we now break down Saturday's game with the Oregon defense against the Stanford offense. We handled the other side of the ball earlier in the hour with the Oregon offense and Stanford defense. We now switch sides to the Oregon defense and the Stanford offense. This is a little bit of a different looking Cardinal offense than years past. And not merely because Bryce Love isn't there or McCaffrey years ago or something like that. No, stylistically, obviously, they still have very big tight ends, and Colby Parkinson at tight end is a giant. So that part is still there. And they still very much like to run the ball. That part is still there. But what is a little bit different here is, in part, it's because they've been down the past couple of weeks, so they've been passing a little bit more because they really had no choice. And in part because, frankly, if you look at their running back contribution behind Cameron Scarlett, there ain't a lot there. So, as a result, they've been passing more than they probably have in years past. And as a result, yeah, Cameron Scarlett's still very productive, and they're still relying on him a good bit. But this is a passing attack with a senior quarterback in KJ Costello, who's quite good. And remember, last season, he was all Pac-12 ahead of Herbert. So respect that quarterback too, albeit with an offense that is not putting up great statistics. But they are passing a bit more. So I'd asked Andy Avalos and Mario Cristobal about that today. Here's what Coach Avalos had to say about this passing attack from Stanford.
The passing attack with the route concepts and the personnel they have, the length at wide receiver, and obviously tight end. They got a whole slew of tight ends that are very capable and very talented. The wide receiver group on the outside, they got guys that can stretch it. They got length on the outside, and then KJ's got a great arm, and he's been in it for a while. So he knows the system, he knows how to operate it, and so it's going to be a huge challenge for us.
So you hear from Avalos there, yeah, as far as the very numerous pieces that Stanford does bring to the table, yeah, they still have the weapons. Now again, those weapons are missing a little bit by way of, look, Arcega-Whiteside ain't there anymore, which I know that doesn't disappoint any Ducks fans because he had a big day last year against many people, but in that game in particular, in that comeback, he had a big day. This is still, though, a Stanford offense that, just like those defensive statistics, some of those are some crooked numbers. Here are the offensive statistics so far. And again, remember, they have played Northwestern, USC, and UCF. They have not played, the punching bags of the SCS. Okay? Scoring offense, 21.3 points, is 10th in the league, 103rd nationally. Total offense, just under 350, 11th in the league, 101st nationally. Rushing, Stanford rushing, 115.3, 9th in the league, 105th nationally. I'll say that again.
That's
Stanford is 9th in the Pac-12 in rushing, with 115 yards per game and 105th nationally. This is not exactly the Stanford offensive attack that you're used to and accustomed to seeing by means of production. Passing 234.3, 9th in the league, 71st nationally. That you can understand a little bit more. One, because they've been losing a couple of games, so they've had to pass. Two, because KJ Costello is capable of passing. And three, because if that running core is not as deep, then they might need to pass a little bit more. So, spoke to, again, Mario Cristobal spoke a little bit about Costello and what he brings to the table as a veteran quarterback.
He's going to play a long time. He's an excellent football player. Big, strong arm, great pocket awareness, mobility. I mean, he gets out of the pocket. He makes some really big plays. He extends plays. He's really, really accurate, strong arm, makes all the throws. That guy's really hard to stop, and we've seen him firsthand up close, and we've seen what he's done also, with last season as well as what he started off this season doing. So we think he's a great football player. You got to be ready to play at your best.
This is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. No way around it. Herbert's the best quarterback in the league. That's undeniable. Whether he ends up having the best season or not by the time the season's over, time will tell. But Costello is probably the second best quarterback in this league. Probably. And again, last season, he had, at points, a better season. This year, all right, it's rough. We're not going to go through the entire receiver core or other things. Again, length and size are part of it. Yes, Parkinson in particular at tight end, big part of it. But the Stanford receiver core is kind of top-heavy, and though they have, size, not a ton of depth. And the running back core, again, it's Cameron Scarlett, and that is about it. There is not that next guy in the wings that is readily apparent with this team that does not rank well on the ground. And that's not a knock on Scarlett or anything else. It's just they don't look to have the running back stable that you're used to seeing out of Stanford right now. And now, unless there's somebody else who's either hurt or too young to be playing right now or whatever. But on paper, entering Saturday's game, Oregon's defense basically needs to key on one running back, a couple of top receivers, and obviously one of the better quarterbacks in this league. Who is protecting KJ Costello? No, I'm asking the question. You can call us on the Davis Roofing hotline at 541-343-KORE to let us know, because that is the question. Who is protecting him? Give us a call, 541-343-KORE, because, yes, they are dealing with injuries across the board. Walker Little is out for the year. That's an All-American caliber left tackle. You hate to see that. Elsewhere, though, at tackle, this is a team that is dealing with injuries to other players as well. So it isn't merely, yes, that Walker Little is out. That happened before. No, Stanford's been dealing with injuries at other spots on the offensive line. And that has presented some real difficult positions, because you've got, on one hand, the interior of the line has veteran players. And, all right, at left tackle, it had a very veteran player in Walker Little, who is out. But on the tackles right now, Stanford, this past game against UCF, had two freshmen starting at left tackle and right tackle. Now, Foster Sorrell, who would start at right tackle, didn't practice earlier in the week. Shaw gives an update on Thursdays. We'll find out more tomorrow if he's been able to go and cleared or whatnot, and we'll see if he says what have you. He's a junior, but he didn't start this last game at right tackle. And on the left side, in place of Walker Little, they had to go with Walter Rouse, who's a 6'6", 291 freshman. So they've got experience on the interior in the starting line, but the tackles are where this team is particularly, I wouldn't say just inherently weak, just inherently inexperienced. And that's going to be an area to attack. Also spoke to Mario Cristobal, Andy Avalos, and David Shaw spoke about that as well. Let's start with Shaw speaking about his team's depth on the offensive line.
We still have multiple guys. Like I said last week and the week before, we have more depth than we had last year. It's just that our depth is freshmen, right? We still have 3 more freshmen that if called into duty, they'll be ready to go. So we don't need to make any drastic changes right now. All the guys that have gone in and played well, they're still learning on the fly. But I'm excited about this young group. I think they're going to be really, really good in short time.
And asked Mario Cristobal and Andy Avalos about, look, this is a team that perhaps Stanford gets Sorrell back at right tackle, but on the left side, they're going to have to turn to a freshman regardless. Here's what Mario Cristobal had to say about Stanford's youth at the tackle positions.
There's not a lot of tape, but these are guys that you kind of come across in recruiting. To me, those guys are just as skilled as any tackles in the country. I mean, they have a strong offensive line tradition. We certainly have studied them extremely well. Those guys are really talented football players that would probably be starting at some other programs. So all the respect in the world for them, and you're preparing for them just like you would for, a great player like Walker Little. There's a reason he's there. He's probably the next one, right, to replace Walker. So, but they've got really, really good offensive linemen.
And Andy Avalos also chimed in about, yes, the youth that Stanford has at tackle and just the challenge that comes with trying to prepare for guys where there's not a lot of game tape to look at when, generally speaking, freshmen don't necessarily start, whether they're true freshmen or redshirt freshmen. There's not that many freshmen who start on the offensive line, but particularly at the tackle positions where you're out in space against bigger edge rushers. Here's what he had to say on that.
There's more and more freshmen playing these days. And so in the trenches, it's less common, but you even start to see it more and more now. More D linemen are playing, more O linemen are playing, and you know what? Those guys are going to battle. They're going to battle, and they've played some really good players, and we fully expect them to come out with a physical mindset on Saturday, and work very hard to establish that run game, and obviously, they've been passing the ball well, so they're going to want to continue to do that.
And David Shaw commented lastly on just the matchup between, yes, his offensive line, no matter who ends up being out there, and an Oregon defense that currently has been on a tear. Again, understanding the context of the competition here, but currently is leading the Pac-12 in tackles for loss, and his line, whether he's relying on really young guys and freshmen or older guys, one way or another, he's going to have to deal with that and try and contain a Oregon defensive front that is being quite disruptive. Here's what David Shaw had to say on that.
Oh, gosh. Have they improved? I thought they were always good. Remember trying to block DeForest Buckner and all those guys. They do a great job and have continued to do a great job through four different head coaches of, which we've tried to do something similar, which is recruiting length and speed. And these guys are long. Guys on the edge are long. Guys on the outside are fast. The guys on the interior defense line are thick and big. So I think they've done a great job recruiting to the way they want to play. Even with a new defense coordinator coming in this year, this personnel seems to fit his scheme very, very well. They move well. They're quick. They're physical. And the offense helps because this is always a great team game, to where if your offense can get out and get you a lead, and now this defense gets to show their variety, and they can play coverage, they can get after you, but they're able to have a little bit more freedom because of the offense that they play with. But yeah, their combination of size, length, and speed, it's impressive.
So if you would like to chat about the Oregon and Stanford game coming up on Saturday, you can give us a call on the Davis Roofing Hotline at 541-343-KORE. That's 541-343-5673. You're listening to the James Crepea Show on Fox Sports Eugene. As we wrap up another fine program, and again, thank our guests, Erik Bacharach of the Tennessean, covers the Tennessee Titans, and Kurt Kragthorpe of the Salt Lake Tribune, covering the Utah Utes. We thank them for joining us again today. But as we wrap up today, I wanted to mention to you, it is now official that HBO formally announced that it's not a Hard Knock series. It's one of their 247 fully immersive series is what it'll be branded under in the college realm. So it will be Arizona State, Penn State, Washington State, which we already knew about. The big difference being that it will be Florida, not Alabama, as the fourth team. So the four teams, again, Arizona State, Washington State, so two from the Pac-12. Penn State and Florida will be featured in this HBO 247 series in the college realm. The first one will be with the Gators. These will be on Wednesdays in the month of October, starting October 2nd. So set the DVRs accordingly for this, and we'll have plenty of audio to come, in particular later in the month when it's the Pac-12 schools. But the order is Florida on October the 2nd. These will be on at 10 o'clock, the hour-long shows, 10 o'clock to 11. both Eastern and Pacific time. And Florida, in the week that they have leading into Towson, which of all the games that they could have picked, given that you originally heard Alabama, perhaps it was a change, and that's just kind of what they got stuck with and what have you. But bottom line, that's not exactly the sexiest game in the world. But Florida does have the new intrigue with the new quarterback and everything else. So that's the first one on October the 2nd. On October 9th, it'll be Penn State for their game leading up to with Purdue. For October the 16th, it will be Arizona State, actually as they lead up to playing Washington State. And then on October the 23rd, it will be Washington State leading up to their game with Colorado.
So really what they wanted was 2 weeks of Mike Leach.
Well, I mean, if ever there was a way to finish it off, that would really be. I can only imagine that you want to talk about must-watch television. So, I mean, holy smokes, that October the 23rd episode is going to be truly phenomenal. That will be beyond intriguing. So that the official word from HBO there. Tentative Oregon baseball schedule was released today. Again, this is tentative. They're still finalizing some things. But they will start in the Angels Classic, which will be played in Tempe, Arizona. Oregon, one of the teams with Illinois, Indiana State, Minnesota, Pepperdine, and San Diego. So the season will start Friday, February the 14th, Valentine's Day, at the Angels Classic in Tempe, Arizona. They'll play 3 games during that tournament. And then they go to Grand Canyon. Among the other games, Nevada's got a home series, Milwaukee. Again, Oregon State, the Civil War Series is in Corvallis this year, but the first game, March the 3rd, will be in Eugene. Hawaii, UCLA, USC, Texas Tech, Cal Poly, Oregon State, Utah, Portland, Arizona, Stanford, Washington State, Washington, Arizona State, Cal. That wraps up your tentative Oregon baseball schedule. You're listening to the James Crepea Show.